will pass a law that allows our department to make arrests. I'm unambiguous on that. But we will do that with compassion to protect people when we have to.
That's Mayor Bruce Harrell announcing the start of a process to create a new city ordinance to deal with drug use and drug possession after a failed attempt at that from the city council last week. But will this be in place by July 1st when a new state law on drugs kicks in, and what will it look like? Plus, how can the newly opened City Hall Park avoid becoming a homeless encampment again? And will Seattle adopt its own capital gains tax? Well, all these stories and more coming your way on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are mine, all mine. And I am joined once again by David Croman, reporter for the Seattle Times. And David, I saw a great tweet from you about Phillies catcher JT Realmuto, who hit for the cycle earlier this week. What's so cool about that, you got this single, double, triple home run in one game, but it's almost like it'd be way cooler if you just hit a whole bunch of home runs, right? Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, statistically, I think it would be more valuable probably to have like a 2 home run game than to hit for the cycle, but we don't care about that. It's just kind of cool to hit for the cycle. It's a novelty accomplishment.
It is. It is. Last Mariner to do it. I'm going to put you on the spot, David. Do you think you have it?
John Olrud?
Oh, just after him was Adrian Beltre in 2008, but John Olrud did hit for the cycle.
Okay.
That's true. How either one of those guys got around to a triple, I'm not quite sure. Anyway, David, thank you so much for being with me. Thanks also to our background noise sponsor, City Grind Espresso on the first floor of City Hall. Thanks also to our show patrons. The Seattle News, Views, and Brews sticker campaign is rolling here, people, and it needs you. Thank you, Sean, for becoming a patron very recently. He's on board for $5 a month, and you can be on board too. We just sent this beautiful decal his way. Thanks again for the support, Sean. Please also send in some action photos of your stickers, folks, if you're patrons out there. We feature those on the show. We answer questions from patrons too, so please become a patron and show your support. Thanks finally to Converge Media. Converge airs the video version of this podcast. Check it out on Converge Wednesday nights at 7. All right, let's get her going with right here, right now. Well, a new policy on drug possession and drug use for the city of Seattle is coming soon. That's the message we're getting from Mayor Bruce Harrell after an attempt to pass a gross misdemeanor drug statute in Seattle failed in the city council last week. So the mayor has put together a task force, including community members, the municipal court, members of the city council, in the hopes of passing a measure as soon as possible. But David, as we know, there's a lot more to this, including the fact that the city attorney pulled out of the community court program last month. The court that was supposed to help divert low-level drug cases into treatment ended up having very mixed results over the past 2.5 years. And so my question is, can Seattle pull together some sort of program that gives clarity to police officers, clarity within our court system, and clarity within our system of diversion and treatment programs within a matter of weeks? What do you think about that?
I think full clarity to all of those things, no, certainly not.
Yeah.
But I think this is actually a very good political opportunity for Bruce Harrell because, there are a few council people who I think are just not going to ever vote to give Ann Davison and the Seattle or the city attorney's office the authority to prosecute these. But there are some, Andrew Lewis was probably going to vote for it until the last minute. And his sort of big complaint was, I don't know what the alternative to community court is here. We talk about treatment, we talk about helping people, but what that looks like is not very well defined. And so, he said he would vote for a bill that had a little more clarity around those things, which is the perfect opening for Bruce Harrell to kind of look like the person who comes in and
saves the day.
The mediator really saves the day or whatever. So, I would be surprised if something didn't eventually get passed. I think, and I don't know if it'll happen by July 1st necessarily, but unlike, for the state, they were really under a lot of pressure to get something done by July 1st because that would have meant there is no law on the books at all, and you get this kind of crazy patchwork. The city, the county prosecutor has said that her office does not have the resources to prosecute these low-level drugs, but theoretically it could. And it's if July 1st comes and goes, unlike what some people have said, drugs are not legal. I mean, the state
Right.
the state law is still there. Police could theoretically still make arrests, and the county prosecutor could theoretically prosecute those things. So, um, there's not perhaps the same level of urgency to get something done by July 1st as there was at the
Hmm.
state level. And, task forces and legislation and all that kind of stuff takes time.
Yep.
So, I think the question for me is like, what will this come up with? I mean, really, this is geared towards satisfying Andrew Lewis in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
What can this come up with that will give Andrew Lewis confidence to vote for this? Is really, I mean, in my mind, what it comes down to.
It's a big issue, and there are other people other than Andrew Lewis who definitely wanna see some sort of resurgence of the
Well, of
community
course,
court. I will
yeah.
say yeah, thank you, for pointing that out, though. I mean, it's a big issue because he was that swing vote, the last person to cast a vote, with this city council member last week, but I think about these deadlines, David. I know the mayor also mentioned that making this happen before the council goes on recess in August might be a possibility too, so we'll see, but clearly, I think there's some pressure on the city too to make this happen, and I guess the part of it that I'm thinking about too is, all right, let's think about the police, let's think about the community court, and then let's think about these different treatment programs. And I know this is a problem statewide, but the mayor was talking about this in the press conference. He was talking about the crisis centers measure that we just passed as King County here. That's going to take years though to come online, and I just worry about that next piece. Okay, we've got this court system, we've got this, police structure that we're trying to put together here. What about those actual programs that need to be in place? Are they there? Is it just a matter of trying to coordinate them? Do you have a feel for that at all?
No, that's always been the kind of big gap in all of this is
Mhm.
a lot of talk about treatment or get people treatment. That's that does not exist on a scale right now that would actually be able to serve the number of people who might use it.
Yeah.
And treatment also, I think there's some sense that you send somebody through treatment and they come out the other side and all is fixed. That is, everything we know about treatment is that's almost certainly never the case. Relapse and repeat arrest is almost inevitable. This happens. It happens to most
Mhm.
people. It's just kind of part of the process. So
Mhm.
um, I, I
Yeah.
I don't think the programs are neither set up nor even when they are, uh, nor will they be as clean. I think as people want them to be.
Yeah. 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 That's the whole thing. It's such a nuanced conversation here. And I know people want to go black and white with what the law reads, but there's clearly a lot more to it than that. And we'll be seeing what happens over the next couple of weeks here with the council, with the mayor, and the city attorney was standing right behind the mayor at this press conference, too. So there's going to be a lot of different people involved with this as we move forward here. Speaking of moving forward, let's do it and then talk about our next topic here. Another one of these let's see what happens moments for the city this week with the reopening of City Hall Park downtown. You will remember, folks, during the pandemic, this became a public safety nightmare, deadly violence within this camp, plus some jurors and other people entering the nearby King County Courthouse were getting harassed. So the park was shut down. And initially, the county was supposed to take over running it. That plan fell through, so it's city property again. And David, we've touched on this before, but I want to revisit it. What can be done to ensure a park like this does not become a major encampment again for people who are homeless? Some thoughts on this?
Yeah, this is tricky because the city's not in the business of public. I mean, parks are public. They're open to
Hmm.
anybody, no matter where you're from, homeless or not homeless. You're allowed to use the city's public parks. You can't keep homeless people out of parks. That said, I would imagine we'll see a little more enforcement around camping. That there's going to be park rangers that are there and are going to be communicating with the
Yep.
police department more perhaps than they were before. So I do think there's probably going to be a little heavier hand around sleeping there or setting up infrastructure to sleep there than we'd seen
Hmm.
before. I mean, I think some of the park, the park has always had its struggles. It got more significant during the pandemic because
Hmm.
the city wasn't really moving encampments at all,
Right.
which some people, a lot of people supported that. There was reason behind that because the CDC itself had recommended against moving homeless encampments, and
Yep.
when you're trying to get homeless folks medicine or services and things like that, providers often say that moving encampments makes all those things a lot more difficult. Um,
Hmm.
Also, it means that some of these encampments, I think, took on a sort of air of permanence to them, and I think City Hall Park was
Yeah.
one of those. So
Oh yeah.
we have seen recently that this mayor's office is not is back in the business of moving encampments. That's happening in places around. So I think we're going to see a heavier hand on keeping those tents out. There was a mention too about fencing off the Prefontaine fountain across the street, which anyone who's ever lived in Seattle knows for, I don't know, since I was born, as far as I can remember, that's just been kind of a place where people have hung out, and there's, I think, a lot of drug dealing and things like that going on there. So the fact of that being fenced off and closed off could make a difference. But it's always tricky, because you can't police who is allowed to use a park and who's not, unless some law is being broken, and you're not breaking a law just by being homeless. So that's going to be the tricky part.
That's true. And I wanted to jump in and just kind of follow up on that thought about the pandemic, David, because I should point out Ballard Commons Park, for example, faced a similar situation during the pandemic, had to be shut down, reopened back in March, has not become an encampment again. We'll see what happens there. I just look at this connection of homelessness and the pandemic and moving forward. What impact are we going to make on homelessness now that COVID, yes, there's a new strain, but basically the pandemic, for the most part, is behind us? Because it sounds like, in terms of what the city's saying, at least, the mayor was talking about this in his press conference regarding drug use. He said, guess what? We're seeing a lot less visible homelessness on the street. Despite what a lot of people are saying in public opinion polls, the data is showing there's less visible homeless that we're seeing. And so as we kind of, quote, get over the pandemic here, are we going to see that that dynamic change? Are we going to see less visible homelessness? I'm reaching here, David, but I wanted to talk about that connection between the pandemic and homelessness because I think it's a big one.
No, I don't think you're reaching at all, because I think one of the sort of there were stories about this and it was reported on by my colleagues, but I do think one of the kind of underappreciated aspects of the pandemic was just the total shutdown of services and places for people to go. And that really made a big difference. There was, because you talk to any service provider and they will tell you, you have to build trust, and you have to build relationships, and you have to build connections with folks to get them through services. And when those shut down, I think a lot of those relationships were lost, and rebuilding those is no easy task. So, I don't think it's a reach to say that since a lot of that stuff has started to reopen, that we would see some kind of measurable improvement and measurable change on the streets. I don't think that's out of the question at all.
Yeah, and we'll have to see where it goes from here in terms of what happens with City Hall Park. Certainly a lot more of the downtown activation plan, as the mayor is calling it, over the next several weeks and into the summer here as well. Thanks for that, David. I want to talk about what's going on up next year, folks. Is it time for a capital gains tax in the city of Seattle? There's a plan for such a tax coming from what some might consider an unlikely source. We're breaking it down on Now Hear This. So there we were, minding our own business last week when Councilmember Alex Peterson, one of the more moderate voices on the Seattle City Council, came up with a press conference proposing a 2% capital gains tax from the city, matching the state's new tax that was upheld by the state Supreme Court back earlier this spring. The tax would replace a current municipal water tax, which I freely admit did not know existed, and Peterson says would create a more equitable taxing system.
Adopting a more fair and progressive capital gains tax would ensure that no one has to pay taxes for their drinking water again, making this the first time Seattle has proactively eliminated a regressive tax.
David, stepping aside from the fact that Alex Peterson, who's not running for his seat again, has held more press conferences in the past few weeks than he has during the first 3 years of his term here, what do you make of this plan for a city capital gains tax? What do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting, and I think it was inevitable, when the court sided with proponents of the capital gains that this was legal. I think it was inevitable that cities like Seattle would start proposing their own. In fact, I'd say that this is the kind of the greatest fear of the of the opponents of the capital gains tax, that it wouldn't just be contained at the state level. And of course, that's tempting, especially when you see headlines that the estimates of how much this capital gains tax at the state would raise were wildly under what is actually being collected. That there turns out there's a lot more rich people in our midst than even we suspected. So it's tempting. I am with you. I didn't actually know that there was a water tax. That's
Hmm.
was news to me. One concern I have heard about repealing the water tax is that it's actually some of the biggest businesses in the city that
Mm. Pay
spend the
that. Yeah.
most on that. That it's kind of individual water users are really not paying that much, but when you look at like massive consumers of water, that actually does add up. So
Mm.
I this is new to me. I'm still wrapping my head around the existence of a water tax at
Yeah.
all, but I do think that this kind of goes at a larger debate that happens generally between Democrats or folks a little more center left is do you
Hmm.
just kind of do the capital gains tax, or do you use the capital gains tax as a means to strip back other taxes? There have been some advocates for rolling at the state level, rolling back some of the B&O taxes in the
Hmm.
state, business and occupation tax in the state, or even property taxes, I suppose. So I mean, I yeah, I think on issues of taxation, Alex Peterson has actually always been fairly vocal
Hmm.
around
The
the
regressive
regressive
nature of
nature of
our
the state's
tax. Yeah. Yeah.
tax.
Yeah. Mhm. Yep.
So in some ways, it's not a surprise. I think it comes as a surprise for people who haven't followed Alex Peterson that much. But this isn't the first
Hmm.
time he's made it clear that he would like to see some changes to the state's tax code.
Yeah, yeah, and that regressive tax system, it is a rallying cry for every politician in our region. But when you actually try to do something about it, that's a whole other thing. I did want to try to keep going down this path here, David. And again, this is some of the fears of some of the people who oppose this measure. It's one thing for a company to relocate out of a state to avoid a certain tax, but it would almost seem easier to move out of a city. Do you see that happening because of this tax? Too early to tell, or I don't know. It's just trying to figure out some of the different hurdles in the way of getting something like this passed.
Yeah, I mean, this comes up every time we talk about taxes, that Amazon will
Mhm,
set up shop in Bellevue. You know, I guess I don't know the answer to that. It's oftentimes, sometimes that happens, but it's even then, it's not very easy to prove that actually had anything to do with the taxes. Bellevue
mhm,
or Amazon, other big businesses have big footprints. Uh, they sometimes, a lot of their workers live on the east side, so they follow the workers. So
sure.
it's always a little hard to tease out reality from kind of political talking points on that, and so I don't know
Mm,
the answer to that if that's actually going to play out here.
yeah. Do you think it gets the support of the Seattle City Council? I would imagine so. What's your feel on that?
I think the capital gains tax will. I have no idea. Like I said, I'm still new to this water tax thing. I have no idea kind
Yeah,
of the
yeah.
nuances there. So
Yeah, right.
that will be what I'm curious about, is whether that aspect sticks. But of course, I would think that
Mhm.
the rest of the city council is very interested in a capital gains tax.
Yeah, yeah, interesting to see. And will these funds be dedicated to Seattle public utilities, et cetera? So we'll have to see what goes on there. But definitely what we're talking about here is a water tax that brings in about $40 million this year, or $40 million every year, and a capital gains tax that I think on the low end is going to bring in 50 to 60 million, is what the city is saying. And if those state numbers are any indication, I think it could be much higher. So we'll be watching that very closely. And another thing that I wanted to watch closely here, folks, it's an issue coming up in the Public Safety Committee this week, not about police, not about 911 alternatives. It's about something that's slowly turning into a crisis just about every summer, preparing for heavy smoke to come into our region. We saw this a few weeks ago with fires in Canada pushing smoke into our skies. We've seen this over the past several summers. Could be an even bigger problem in our state this summer and fall. Fire officials predicting an above average fire season, with Western Washington facing some particular risk. And David, what really gets me about this presentation to the city council committee, Seattle's infrastructure is just unprepared for an extreme heat and smoke emergency. What goes through your mind when you think about that?
Well, first thing that goes through my mind is that I have a 8-month old, and the idea of having
Yeah.
smoke outside is a little terrifying to me. But I think sort of like I do think that there has been a lot of changes over the
Hmm.
last few years. I mean, I remember I think it was Gene Balk did a story on how under air conditioned Seattle was a couple years ago, and some people, I think around here, we had sort of come to think of air conditioning as like a luxury,
Hmm.
but increasingly that's no longer the case. That it's becoming a necessity. I think the last few years have, I don't know what the latest number is. I imagine that more and more people have added air conditioning, or at least air conditioning units to their homes, and with that, some air
Hmm.
purifiers. So I know that I had never owned an air conditioning
Yeah.
or purifying unit before, and now I own both. I imagine I'm not alone in that. So,
Yeah.
um, I think we're sort of begrudgingly becoming needing to think about our weather in the same way that people who live in hotter places need to think about our weather.
Yeah, yeah. The city is saying that more than half of Seattle homes do not have air conditioning or filtration systems. I think you're right. A lot of people are investing in them right now, but these different older locations, perhaps people who can't afford units like that, that's a big issue here too. And the city really has limited options for these cool down spaces where it can direct people to go for relief from heat and poor air quality. Some community members not even really wanting to do that. So this is really kind of just a whole concept change when it comes to this. I think you're right. And this is interesting to me, David, because it turns into one of these weather events. The city's working on a coordinated response to involve SDOT, Seattle City Light agencies, also like the Regional Homelessness Authority. That's an important nexus here, too. This idea of getting people inside with some air conditioning and also some sort of filtration system that would deal with this hazardous air. But this just seems like a very different event. You get major snow or rain events, you can still breathe the air outside. Help me with this because I think the city's trying to wrap its head around it, David. This idea of how to respond to an event like this when we have extreme heat and when we have extreme smoke.
Yeah, it's a good question because it's sort of inescapable. Wear masks, I suppose. I mean, everyone has
Yeah.
N95s now, so that's helpful. And stay indoors. I mean, the big question is for the people who can't go indoors. People who have to work outside. I think it's a really big
Hmm.
problem for them. I don't. I think there's some mitigating stuff you could do, but at the end of the day, it's it's smoke, and it's hard to kind of legislate and policy smoke away.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's a sprawling issue. The
Except,
state's Labor and Industries Board is working on this now to try to figure out the right standards for people working outside. I think that'll be an interesting piece here too. But yeah, I'm very interested to see what the city comes up with. They're talking about this coordinated plan, and we'll most likely see something roll out this summer with this. So keep an eye on that, folks. We'll make sure we do that too. All right, well, coming up, Sound Transit is spending some big bucks on some parking garages at a time when a lot of people are working from home. How's this going to work? David's got the scoop on transportation talk. David, you recently wrote in the Seattle Times about 3 parking garages Sound Transit is finally working to bring online in Kent, Sumner, Auburn. Voters agreed to build these garages back in 2008. Inflation has raised the cost on them significantly, but after a series of delays, they are finally coming online. Only problem is, will there be workers coming back to in person work to use them? What did you find out in this report?
yeah, this is interesting because like you said, these are long promised. People have been waiting for them for a long time, but now they are finally moving forward at a time when there are some serious questions around um, not just transit, but specifically commuter transit. And so these are built near this. These are going to be built near the Sounder commuter train, and
Hmm.
that train. We have seen some climbing back of ridership on light rail and metro, especially in the middle of the day and on the weekends. But the Sounder doesn't run in the middle of the day or on the weekends. It is purely a
Hmm.
commuter train, and as a result, it's still only about 30% of its pre-pandemic ridership. Um, so this story is interesting to me because transit leaders often project confidence about the future and that ridership will come back, but this is really, for me at least, the first time that they have actually had to kind of put some money behind that confidence, and
Mm.
they're doing it. They're saying we believe enough that people are going to use the Sounder again, that we are going to go forward with this extremely expensive plan to add more parking near the Sounder, despite the fact that at least at two of these places in Kent and Auburn,
Hmm.
there's a lot of parking there right now, and those garages are roughly half full right now, and they're going to be adding more spaces to that at a cost of over
Hmm.
$200,000 a space. So it says a few things. It says that the board
Mm.
is willing to place a bet that ridership is going to come back. and also that they think that it is still a good investment to encourage people to drive to these stations. Of course, a lot of urbanists and environmental groups would prefer that money is spent on other connections, better bus connections or bike connections or something like that. But what we hear is the reality is what it is, which is that people still drive, and so it's better that they drive to a transit stop than that they drive down I-5. So it's it's an interesting conundrum to me, and that's why I wrote about it.
Yeah, and I look at this too. It's almost one of these "if you build it, they will come" kind of moments as well. And I think about that with the ridership that needs to increase for Sound Transit, and just this idea that okay, should we be building these structures for people to drive to get on transit, or should we be building housing in these areas too? I think that's part of the discussion too, right?
Yeah, definitely, because this is seen as really valuable real estate because it's near transit. I mean, it's if you live right near this station, you're even if as the crow flies, you're still far from Seattle or whatever. It basically puts you close to Seattle because you can just walk and hop on a train. But and so that that's why we've seen a lot of discussion around transit oriented development and things like that at the state level, and trying to pass new rules to put more housing near bus stops and train stops. And even some of the board members who are voting in favor of these garages acknowledge that. Claudia Balducci in particular said, this is some of the best real estate, and it's sort of a shame that we are putting it towards parking. But with these particular garages, I think the general sense is they have been in the works for so long and so long promised that to not build them now would be sort of going back on something that the board said that they were going to do many, many years ago and have failed to do. That argument isn't great for people who don't support building these garages at all, but I think that's the one that is going to ultimately win the day. There's a kind of a more cynical way of looking at it too, which is just that from a political perspective, there are certain board members who really see these garages as very important to their community and have taken them on as kind of pet projects. And so I think the other board members feel like if they start nitpicking and picking apart other board members' kind of preferred projects, that could then come back to bite them later when it's their preferred project that's on the table. So I think there's a little bit of inertia around that too, which is that there are certain things that they just don't feel strongly enough about to want to rock the boat on. And this, I think, might be one of them.
Wow, I'm very interested to see how that pans out. Great report there, David. Thank you. It's time to wrap up here. And David, there was a great profile of you recently posted in the Seattle Times, but I got to ask, is it true that online readers are questioning your legitimacy as a transportation reporter because you ride a bike? What's going on, man?
Yeah, they asked me in this little Q&A of how I get around, and it's true. I ride my bike and I take the ferry a lot, and I got at least one reader who said that basically disqualifies me from writing about transportation because I ride my bike. I don't think that's the majority opinion, but anytime there is a certain constituency of people out there that is just really not a fan of bike riders, and so you hear from them every now and then.
Yeah. I'm sure it's going to be in the rant and rave section before too long. So, but David, I'm going to keep raving about you. Keep on going multimodal, man. It's the way to go here, folks. Thank you, David, for joining me. Thanks, everybody, for joining us on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. This podcast is on Apple. It's on Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you like to listen. Please find Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon, too, folks, and show your support. Thanks for watching on Converge Media as well. We will see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2023.